Hi everyone, welcome to the July 31st edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragonin, and I'll be joined very shortly by my co-host Craig Milkowski. We're going to keep it pretty tight on the handicapping this weekend. We're just going to look at the late pick 4 at Saratoga on Saturday, but it's a really jam-packed set of stakes races, obviously topped by the 9th race, which is the Grade 1 Whitney. It's just a 5-horse field, but it's really packed with quality. Then we've got the Allen Jerkens as the 10th. We've also got the Bowling Green and the Caress on Turf, so we'll go through that entire sequence. And Craig, the Whitney only drew 5 horses, and I know some people were getting a little down on the fact that some of these stakes races have drawn small fields. In this situation with the Whitney, I'm not really too down on it because they're the 5 right horses.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think an argument could be made that every horse in the field has some kind of shot. I mean, a lot of times we'll see where it's just filler to get the 5 in some of these stakes races, but I don't think that's the case in the Whitney at all. I think it's a race where you probably want to make a decision. I don't think you want to spread too wide in here. At least that's how I'm going to approach it once we get into the talking about the handicapping. But yeah, I couldn't argue with anybody that made a case for any horse in the field because I think on paper they all have at least some kind of shot.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's going to be a really exciting race to watch. And I was kind of going back through the history books and looking at some past Whitneys and watching some replays. And some of the most memorable Whitneys have had really small fields. I mean, that's just I think it's recently racing fans have become just obsessed with having these 10 and 12 horse fields in all the stakes races. And it does make it seem like they're more competitive betting affairs. But a lot of times there's a ton of filler in those races. And I don't mind seeing just a few really talented horses go to battle and put on a show and not have any stragglers standing in their way. I like it, so I'm looking forward to this race quite a bit. Before we get to that pick 4, though, I should just give a quick mention to the other Grade 1 race that we're going to see on Saturday at Saratoga, which is carded early on the card as the 5th, the Grade 1 Personal Ensign. This is a small field with not nearly the depth of the Whitney, although it does feature a real star, Midnight Bisou. I don't think either of us are trying to beat Midnight Bisou in this spot, but it's going to be cool to see her in action going for a second Personal Ensign victory.
Yeah, it'll be good. It'll be interesting to see her not being ridden by Mike Smith. Santana's taken the mount as obviously the coronavirus has restricted who can come in and come out. So I'll be watching just for that reason alone. As you say, it's not the deepest field. I mean, I think Point of Honor is a really solid filly, but I just don't think she's at that quality, and she also needs some pace, which she's really not going to get in here, it doesn't look like. So I'll be watching this one just as a fan of the game and see how it turns out. Hope Midnight Bisou runs really well. And eventually, I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing her and Monomoy Girl hook up again.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, she's supposed to pass this test pretty easily. She's going to be a very heavy favorite. I'm a little interested to see what we get from Vexatious, who's looked like a really nice graded stakes quality dirt router at a few points in her career. Doesn't always show up, but she put forth a really solid effort behind Monomoy Girl in that Ruffian last time, and she almost beat our Breeders' Cup Distaff winner last year, Blue Prize, in the Summer Colony. So to me, she's kind of the wild card in this race, though I think it's going to be tough for any of these horses to beat Midnight Bisou. Let's head on to that late pick 4 sequence, which is races 9 through 12. And obviously it starts with that Whitney, which we started off by talking about. Tom's d'Etat. He's just way the horse to beat in this race. He just seems to be better than ever now as a 7-year-old. Not that he wasn't good before, because he was earning some gigantic speed figures going all the way back to his 4-year-old season. But he's just a horse that seems to really be doing it against top company these days. If he repeats his Stephen Foster, he's just going to be tough for this field to beat.
Yeah, he's just in career best form at age 7, which, we talk about that sometimes with horses on turf, but very rarely do you talk about it on dirt. So I just think it's a really good thing. He's a really strong horse. Good to see him sticking around. And I always say this on our shows. I mean, it's really nice when some of these older horses stick around and you get to see them develop and see what they can really do. As a speed figure guy, I mean, yeah, I love 3-year-olds and the Triple Crown Trail and all that. But when you want to see the really good figures, you need these horses to stick around and keep running. We see it sometimes in sprints, but not often in routes. Now, we got lucky a few years ago with horses like California Chrome and Gun Runner. And I'm not trying to say Tom's d'Etat is quite at that level, but he's not that that far behind, especially given what we saw from him in the Foster. What I really like with him is just how versatile he is. He's a horse who can run right up near the lead and just keep flying to the finish as he did in the Foster, but he can also do like he did in the Oaklawn Mile, where he's well off the pace. And frankly, I thought he was beat that day just because he was so far back, and he wound up winning pretty easily over Improbable. So he's going to be really tough to beat. He draws perfectly outside. He can kind of track, see what's going on in front of him, or be assertive as he was last time. And I'm totally with you. He is the horse to beat. Now, I'm not going to single him, though, because I do think there are a couple others I would give some chance to. And the first one would be Improbable. He's really looked more professional, particularly his last time out in that Santa Anita Gold Cup. I loved his race that day. He got a great final time figure. He narrowly lost to Tom's d'Etat when you could arguably say he took the worst of it from a trip standpoint, where he was up closer to a hot pace, lost a lot of ground. I would say it was Tom's d'Etat was probably a little better that day, but not enough so that I wouldn't think Improbable might be able to turn the tables. And the other one I would use, they would be my two A's in the race. And if I was going to use another one to B, it would be Code of Honor. I don't particularly care for By My Standards drawing inside. I just think he's going to have a tough trip with Improbable and particularly Mr. Buff. And I mean, if somebody wants to bet Mr. Buff, I couldn't argue with that either, because he's probably going to be on the lead, though we thought that the last couple times and he hasn't been. But he just hasn't looked the same horse to me since we've come back from the break of racing in New York. So I'm going to go against him. I don't love Code of Honor in here for a couple reasons. One, I don't think there's going to be a ton of pace. And two, I still just think we're going to find out that his best distance is going to be at 1.25 miles, which I assume we'll see in the Jockey Club Gold Cup and maybe the Breeders' Cup. But this just might be a little short for him against horses of this quality.
Yeah, I made Tom's d'Etat my top pick in this race. I don't love picking favorites in stakes like this, but for all the reasons you said, I just think he's far and away the most likely winner, primarily due to the trip that I think he's going to work out here, because with Mr. Buff drawn outside of these horses, you'd imagine that they're going to get more aggressive with Mr. Buff this time and just try to put him on the front end. They messed around a little bit with rating tactics in his last two starts. His one chance in this race is just to go. And I think Tom's d'Etat is going to be able to follow him right into the race, get that same outside stalking trip that he got in the Foster last time. And if he gets that kind of trip, I just don't think they're going to run him down in the stretch. So he's my pick in this race, but he's not a horse that I would single. I mean, I never like to single horses, and I would use both Improbable and Code of Honor as backups. Nothing clever for me. I do prefer Code of Honor a little bit because I was actually very encouraged by the race that he ran in the Met Mile last time. The pace of that race really wasn't that fast, and take nothing away from Vekoma. I mean, I think Vekoma's one of the most exciting older horses in the country, and he's just really fast, and he can do it going shorter or over 1 mile. But Code of Honor was at the back of a pretty tightly bunched field down the backstretch. John Velasquez really had no choice but to go wide around the far turn. And I know some people were disappointed with his stretch run that he didn't get there in the end, given that it looked like he had built up some momentum at the quarter pole. But they came home in 23-2, and nobody was going to catch Vekoma once he kicked on at the top of the stretch like he did. So I thought Code of Honor actually ran pretty well that day. And I don't know what his best distance is. I mean, I'm actually kind of the opposite opinion. I thought 1 mile going around one turn might be his best distance, even though he's run well going 1.25 miles in the past. I think he's just a really versatile horse. And the slow pace here that we're expecting to see, maybe that works against him. But he's got a really nice turn of foot on him, and he certainly doesn't mind running through kickback. I know when he won the Travers last year, I almost didn't recognize him because he was just so covered in dirt at the end of that race. He's a really gutsy horse, and I expect him to run well here. I just think it's going to be a tall order to reel in Tom's d'Etat. And Improbable, for me, he's kind of the wild card because I know we both liked him in the Hollywood Gold Cup last time, but we liked him, I think, because we weren't thrilled with his competition that day, and that race got even easier once midcourt decided to throw in one of his clunkers, as he's known to do. So this is just a big step up in class for Improbable. He's got the raw talent to be right there at the end of this race. You just don't know if you're always going to see it from him, and even his best race might not be good enough to beat Tom's d'Etat. So I'm a little bit on the fence with him, but I would use both of them as backups.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you with Code of Honor. I thought he ran very well last time, given the race setup. The reason I bring up the distance, sometimes I forget to emphasize, I am a figure guy, and for me, he's run his best figures going those longer distances. But he's certainly versatile and has handled most things that have been thrown at him in his career. And as you say, a really cool horse, and I'm not going to get knocked out of the pick four early if Code of Honor wins.
Move on to the second race in this sequence. It's the Grade 1 Allen Jerkens going the 7 furlongs for 3-year-olds. And this is a really fun race, arguably the best race on the card, because you do have a prohibitive favorite in the number 6, No Parole, but he's a horse who's coming off a performance last time that was somewhat aided by the fact that nobody went after him. And it just felt like a lot of his rivals in that Woody Stevens maybe underestimated his talent a little bit. And this time, you've got to think he's going to have more of a target on his back. And some of the horses, even that faced him last time that weren't ridden that aggressively, are going to apply more pressure. And in this race, there are a lot more interesting alternatives that are going to be bigger prices. So I think there are a lot of ways to go in this Allen Jerkens.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a race that on paper, our pace projector has the paces hot. And I think if memory serves, we saw that in the Woody Stevens too, but it didn't really develop. But given, as you said, a lot of the horses are back from that race who kind of were ridden more passively that day, I think they almost have to make it more aggressive this time. I mean, I know it's New York, and that's always an iffy proposition to assume the riders are going to get over aggressive. But horses like Mischievous Alex and Echo Town, I'm not sure how they're going to win the race if they try to do the same thing they did last time. You can note in the comments that Echo Town took a bump, and he took that from, I believe it was Mischievous Alex. But when I watched the replay in the head-on, as I'm sure you saw, it was nothing that was that big and led to them being forced to be back off the pace. So I think it was more a tactical thing. And yeah, this one is a tough one. I will say this is a big field of 11. I do think there is quite a bit of filler in here, as we were talking about with other races. There's probably 4 or 5 horses I wouldn't even consider, but I'm going to have to use No Parole. He was just so impressive, but I'm not going to make him my top pick. Echo Town is another one I'm going to use. I was impressed with his previous races, not so much his last one, but I do think he wants to be a little bit ridden a little bit more aggressively. The horse I'm going to make my top pick is 3 Technique on the turn back from those races at Oaklawn, where, I mean, you have to say he was a bit disappointing, but I really liked his sprint races earlier in the year, particularly the one at Aqueduct, and Saratoga when he broke his maiden, actually, is the one that I particularly liked. And I just think he's going to get a really good setup in here, so he's going to, I guess, be my top pick in what I think is a really contentious race.
Yeah, we're on the same page here. I'm using No Parole. I just think last time was the time to have him at 3-1, and he's going to be a shorter price against a tougher field in this race. And I just want to take a shot against him because he's bad value, in my opinion. And I did also put 3 Technique on top here for all the reasons you mentioned. I mean, I was a big fan of this horse last year. We talked about him a bunch of times on the TimeformUS Pacecast. I even wanted to pick him in the Champagne when he was entered that day, and he was a late scratch, and Tiz Law ended up winning that race. Obviously, he's had some setbacks, and he was a little disappointing over the winter at Oaklawn Park, but I just didn't think he had that explosive turn of foot going the 2 turns that we had seen from him in the 1-turn races last year, and now they're bringing him back in admittedly a pretty ambitious spot, but he's got that room for improvement. He still has upside, and I've watched some of his recent workouts on XBTV. It just looks like this horse is thriving right now, and I expect him to come back with a big effort. We'll see if it's good enough to beat these horses, because he does have to get significantly faster. But I mean, I made a 6-1 in the line because I thought this is a horse that a lot of people could land on with the pace situation and just the fact that he had a bit of a following last year. But I can't see him going too short in this race because there are so many other ways to go. So if he's around that price, 5 or 6-1, I think that's fair enough on 3 Technique. And I don't want to discount Echo Town. I actually almost made him my top pick because, like you said, they've got to get more aggressive with him than they did in the Woody Stevens. And yeah, I saw the same thing with that bump. I didn't think it really affected him that much. And he's just a horse that's run a bunch of speed figures that are not quite on the level of what No Parole earned last time in the Woody Stevens, but they're pretty close. And he showed he handled it the 7 furlongs last time. He's a horse who just has so much heart. He's a real fighter. I think if they just get him in the mix by the time they're at the quarter pole, he's going to fight for this victory because he does not like to give it up. So I expect a good effort from Echo Town. We'll see what price he is relative to 3 Technique. They're the 2 that I would really focus on. And the others are more backups for me. I mean, there are a couple horses I do want to get your take on. One of which is Tap It to Win, who's kind of the biggest wild card in this race. When he's good, he's really good. But it seems like whenever he encounters a straw in his path, he just throws in the towel, and it's hard to know what you're going to get from him.
Yeah, I don't want any parts of him in this spot. He's one of those horses I don't see how he can win. He's a horse who needs to be up front. All his best races have come when he's right up on the lead, and I just don't see how he could handle the likes of a No Parole and even Echo Town and still keep on going. He's a little light in the speed figure department, so he is one that won't be on my tickets. And another one I could say the same thing about is 8 Rings, who was so good as a 2-year-old before that Breeders' Cup Juvenile where he just was a no-show, didn't do much running. And I didn't like what I saw at Oaklawn, frankly. I mean, he just didn't show me a lot of anything. Now he's had another layoff of 3 months, and I think your morning line is probably spot on, but it is Bob Baffert. I'm sure he's going to take some money, and I just don't want any parts of him either.
Yeah, he was the other horse I wanted to ask you about because he's just a weird horse to be in this race off his one performance this year. And you don't typically see Bob Baffert sending horses east for grade 1 races that are going to be 8 or 10 to 1. I mean, the last one of those that I remember was Arrogate. So it kind of, raises my eyebrows a little bit that he's in this race and I don't know what to do with him. I can't pick him from a handicapping standpoint. He's a horse that I think you have to be a little bit afraid of, though. And the others, I didn't really want to use that prominently. I think Mischievous Alex could kind of get lost in the shuffle here because people might, sort of forget how good he was at the beginning of the year, and he didn't run last time in the Woody Stevens. But he's one of the horses in particular that I think has to be used more aggressively, especially given that he's drawn right inside of No Parole. They've got to try to go with him because he's pretty fast. I don't know if I love him to win the race, but I wouldn't dismiss him if he's a big price in here.
No, I agree. He's one I will definitely have on my tickets, probably as more of a C type, just because he has shown that ability to run fast. One horse I tried to make a case for, and in the end I just couldn't do it, was Shoplifted. I'm kind of a big fan of the turn back, especially in these 7 furlong races. Not so much at shorter, but I just watching his last few and looking at the setup and just frankly his speed figures, I couldn't come up with them.
Yeah, I looked at him too because I liked him in the Woody Stevens last time. He ended up being a ridiculously short price that day. I don't know how he got bet down to 7 to 2. Yeah, I just couldn't quite make him good enough to win this race, though I think he can get a piece. Moving on to the 11th race, which is the Grade 2 Bowling Green, going 1 3/8 on the inner turf course at Saratoga. And this one, it's really a matchup of the old guard of this turf marathon division against some newer faces. And the leader of that old guard is our old friend, Sadler's Joy. And, I always love this horse, love to see him race. I have to resist the temptation to pick him every time because he doesn't win that often. I will say, this is not the toughest turf marathon that we're going to see. And just from a class perspective, you do kind of have to admit that Sadler's Joy is the horse to beat.
Yeah, he probably is. I mean, I guess I got to use him on my tickets, but if I do so, it's going to be defensively. For one, I mean, I haven't picked a ton of prices in the first couple legs, and if he wins at 8 to 5 or 2 to 1 or whatever it is, it's going to kind of be a treading water type pick 4. So, maybe I'll find him a way to get on, but only with some of the more pricey horses I used in the earlier legs, particularly 3 Techniques. So, yeah, it's a tough race. This is a grade 2 in name only, as you say. The second choice on the morning line is Cross Border, a horse who just won a New York bred stakes race for $85K, 3 back. He couldn't win an allowance race behind Value Proposition. I think his trainer, Mike Maker, you got to take him serious in these mile and 3/8 races. And he's got a couple in here with that one and Marzo. But this is a race where I'm definitely going to spread a little bit. I'm certainly going to use Marzo just because he's a price and it's Mike Maker. And I certainly look silly with all the talking I've done if he won and I didn't have him. But he's a horse I like. I'm even going to use a long shot in Highland Sky. I actually kind of liked his last race, even though it was in lower company, just a listed stake. I think he's more of a mile and 3/8 horse like he ran that day. So I'm not really paying attention to his comeback race where he didn't run at all. But from a speed figure perspective at 15-1, he's right there with the others and one that I'll be using. But the horse I'm going to make my top pick in here is Dot Matrix. He's a horse who I just think he didn't get a very good trip at all last time. He wound up wide. He had some trouble at the start. And it was a really weirdly run race where they went kind of fast early. Then it just kind of slowed down. And if I remember right, there were 6 or 7 horses at the end within about a length of each other. And he just really didn't have anywhere to go. So he's the one I'm going to make my top pick in here. But it's a race where I'm definitely looking to get some prices.
Yeah, it is a funny race. I almost put Sadler's Joy on top because I really do think this is a good spot for him. A mile and 3/8 is arguably his best distance, and he typically does run some of his better races at Saratoga. Just, I think those tighter turns and the fact that it almost makes Javier Castellano wait until the last second to move with him, I think that all works in his favor. He's just kind of a hard horse to trust to win races. And I know you're not supposed to put horses like that on top at short prices. So I put him second here. I made Cross Border my top pick. Nothing too clever. I think Mike Maker really has all the best of it in this race because not only does he have 2 horses in here, he's got the 2 fastest horses in the early going, and they're drawn right down alongside each other towards the inside. So you would imagine they could get aggressive with Marzo, send him to the lead. They could have Cross Border stalk right outside of him, or vice versa. And it just feels like Mike Maker is going to be able to totally dictate terms on the front end here, rather the 2 Ortiz brothers will be able to do so. And that's going to make both of these horses tough. I don't know if Marzo is quite at this level, but as you said, you don't want to underestimate Mike Maker at a price in these races. And Cross Border, I know he's coming back on short rest just 10 days after that Lubosh victory, but I take it as a positive when trainers run their horses back in big races off short rest. To me, it says that they came out of those victories in good order and they're just doing well. So Cross Border, I know that he's never quite been that grade 1 and grade 2 level horse in the past, but this is not the toughest race in the world. And if he gets a good trip here and is able to kick on for home, I think he's just going to be tough to run down. So I put him on top. The horses coming out of the Manhattan, I wasn't quite sure how to sort them out. I thought Sadler's Joy ran the best race because he made that big wide sweep on the turn, lost a ton of ground, and still almost got there. Dot Matrix, I agree sort of with what you said, that he was a little wide early. I didn't think the start affected him that much. He was just kind of flat in the stretch that day, and it was a real step backwards from his very good effort in the Tiller before that. So I don't know which way to go with him. I'm a little concerned that he got good for a while, and maybe now he's heading in the wrong direction. And Channel Maker is kind of always the forgotten horse. He wins less often than Sadler's Joy does, but he's still capable of running some big races, even now as a 6-year-old. And I wouldn't totally discount him because he could also get a very good trip here, stalking outside. That's how he likes to run, racing free and in the clear. So I don't think he's impossible if he's going to be the 3rd or 4th choice in this race.
No, I think we agree. It's definitely a race you have to spread. I am curious. We're only talking about the pick 4 here. I know we've talked about the pick 5 before, and you just want to hit it and kind of hope that your payoff matches some, that you get right in the right spots. But it's kind of hard to play a pick 5 for a lot of value when it's just so many legs. But I think at a pick 4 with a race like this, do you think any differently? Because I do. I kind of tend to look at my tickets and toss out the ones where any of them for sure that have more than 2 favorites on them. So that's something I'm going to do here, and why I said I would use Sadler's Joy defensively. I'm not going to have him on tickets where I already have horses like No Parole and Tom's d'Etat, because I think it's just throwing money away personally. But I'm curious how you look at those.
Yeah, I mean, a pick 4 that's won by all favorites is going to pay pennies. I mean, whereas a pick 5, even if you hit it and there are favorites win 4 legs, it's still going to pay decently just because there are so many potential winning combinations. I agree with you. If this is a sequence where no parole wins, and Sadler's Joy wins, and Tom's d'Etat wins, it's not going to matter who wins the Caress the last race. It's going to pay. It's not going to pay that much, even though the Caress, and we're going to get to in a second, that's a very competitive race. So yeah, I do want to pare down my wagers and either emphasize and bet a little bit more money on those shorter priced combinations, which is a valid strategy if you really have a strong opinion about some short prices, or I just don't want to, play those short prices at all. So you'll have to make that determination. I'm going to spread I keep calling it the Woody Stevens, in the Allen Jerkens a little bit and try to de-emphasize no parole, and I think you're going to do the same thing. So that would be my strategy.
Yeah, that's good. Good point you make about playing multiple combinations if it's a shorter price you really like. Something that is a little tougher to do in the pick 5, I think. And I guess I got to reevaluate that, seeing some of the pick 6 news we've seen where people are playing $8 combos. But that's for another day. I'm just looking at this as your general horse player sitting at home looking at these races. And another thing I've noticed in these is people do tend to spread more, in my opinion, in the later legs and go shorter in the early legs. So a race like the Caress won't really have the value that I think it would have if you had a 15-1 win early, as it'll have as the last race in the sequence if a 15-1 wins.
Yeah, it's funny. Thoughts like that don't even cross my mind. Like, let me single early on and then I can get alive to a lot of horses later. I don't know. I don't play the races that way. To me, every leg is kind of equal in how I would approach it. So, I'm not trying to just get alive. I'm trying to actually win the wager. I do just want to mention before we wrap up the Bowling Green, you mentioned Highland Sky. For anybody that hasn't looked at Sunday's entries at Saratoga yet, he's actually entered in the 1 3/4 flat out. I'm sorry, 1 3/4. What's that race called? Birdstone on the dirt. So we'll see where they end up running him, but that's an interesting placement. Let's wrap things up with the 12th race, the final leg of this pick 4 sequence, also the final leg of the pick 5 sequence on Saturday at Saratoga. This is the Caress going 5.5 furlongs on the turf. And we've got a rematch of the horses from the license fee at Belmont. That was a funny race to watch back because it was run in a driving rainstorm and it's kind of hard to make out who was who until very late in the race. I'll handle the cash, got the job done as a slight upset that day, beating Delica. Delica, though, she got caught up in some traffic at the top of the stretch, and Joel Rosario gave her a good ride. She was just coming a little bit too late at the end. There is an argument that she was the best horse that day.
Yeah, I would make that argument myself. She's actually going to be my top pick in here based on that trip. She has some back speed figures. That didn't come up the strongest race for older fillies and mares going for $200,000. And the figure she was running last year in the mid-teens should be able to win this race. So this is a race where I'm going to go pretty short. She would be my top pick, Delica for sure. And the other one I'm going to use is based on the pace projector in Jakarta. I think her form's a little bit dirty up. She's had some races on the dirt, but if you look back through her past performances, one of her very best races was going 5 furlongs on the turf at Gulfstream. Now, she did have a slow pace that day. She didn't get a lot of pressure, but I do think it's possible that's going to happen again, as our pace projector points out. And I think she's dangerous in that spot. So at a price, she's going to be the other one that I use in here.
Yeah, I think this is actually a pretty competitive race. And I am a little bit concerned about that pace projector for Delica because Delica does not have a lot of speed. And frankly, that's the case for a lot of horses in here. And if Joel takes her all the way to the back of the pack, as he's been doing recently, and she's going to have to pass them all, as good as she is, that could be a tall order. I'm not a big fan of Jakarta, even with this pace advantage. In my opinion, she's just not really a turf horse. I know she won that optional claiming race at Gulfstream. To me, that race was over in the first quarter mile when, going 22-1 in a 5 furlong turf sprint where the final time is 55 at Gulfstream. That's just absolutely walking. That was just not a competitive race. So I'm not going to concede that she's a turf horse based on that effort. And I just don't really see Jakarta being a contender in here. So maybe if she falls apart, the race falls apart, Well, I don't know about that. It just seems like I'll Handle the Cash, who I agree with you didn't run quite as well as Delica last time, but it just seems like I'll Handle the Cash is going to get first run again and maybe have that edge by, taking a big lead into the stretch. We'll see. I'm using both of these horses, and I do think Delica is the better runner, but there are others to consider. I mean, the number 9, Kariba, she's somewhat intriguing. This will be her stakes debut, but they turned her back to sprinting last time at Belmont, and she earned a speed figure that puts her right in the mix here. And Peaceful, who she beat, came back to win the other day at Saratoga. I'm not going to discount her. I worry a little bit that she's going to take a lot of money because Irad Ortiz is aboard, and Christophe Clement's horses have been getting bet like he's the new Chad Brown. So I'm a little concerned that she's not going to offer value, but I would use her somewhere.
Yeah, because she's the other one that's going to be on my ticket. For one, it's Irad Ortiz, and he just wins a lot of these races. But I liked how she was able to overcome what was a pretty tepid pace last time. She got a nice figure of 111 for the effort. Kind of draws a good post where she can see what's going on. I don't think she's not a closer like Delica is. So I do think she has a big shot in here, and certainly not leaving her off my tickets as well. And I think we'll get every bit of that 9-2 on her. Maybe with the connections, not quite as much as you'd get if there were some other names attached, but I could see her getting a little overlooked in here.
Yeah, I wanted to get a little more creative with my top pick, and maybe I'm just going too far off the reservation here, but I think the number 3, Sweet By and By, is an interesting player who could just get lost in the shuffle in this race. Because in terms of raw ability and just natural talent, you can make the case that she is every bit as good as Delica and arguably maybe just the best horse in this race. Now, the big question is 5.5 furlongs just too short for Sweet By and By? And maybe the answer is yes. But, she's depicted so far back on the pace projector, primarily because she's coming out of route races. Any horse coming out of turf routes is just going to be nowhere on a pace projector in a turf spread. That's just the fact of the matter. But Sweet By and By has shown some tactical speed in her sprint races in the past. And I don't think she's going to be so far outrun in this race. And she has run some decent turf sprints in the past, particularly when she was second to Alexandra at Belmont last year. Now, I know Tony Dutrow hasn't won a race in 2020, and people might just view this trainer switch as a big negative, but Tony Dutrow can still train a horse. And Sweet By and By is coming off a pretty impressive series of workouts. I just feel like she's going to be dismissed in this race, and she's good enough to win.
Yeah, when I was handicapping this race, I tried to make a case for her. And if this was Belmont going 6 or 7, I would probably like her a lot more. I have similar reservations as you about the distance. And this is one as a vertical player. If she wound up going up from that morning line and she was 8 to 10 to 1, I'd consider her. But we're not going to have that kind of insight when you play the pick 4 first. So assuming the morning line is fairly reasonable, she's not for me. And I trust the morning line guy at Saratoga implicitly.
Well, you might have more faith in him than I do in this race. We'll see. But yeah, I thought this was a pretty competitive race to end the sequence. I was not just about the favorites, right? Spread a little bit, though I would lean on Delica definitely as an A in this race because she is the most likely winner. That's the pick 4 sequence at Saratoga on Saturday. Hopefully we gave out some good ideas there. I'd imagine we'll recap all these races on Tuesday. I know we're going to try to stick to our schedule of doing the 2 podcasts a week just because there's so much to talk about during this time of year, especially with the Saratoga meet going on. So we'll try to record a pace cast on Tuesday. Look for that then. Craig, it's always good to talk about the races with you. Remember that you can always listen to the TimeformUS Forecast and the TimeformUS Pacecast on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening this week, and we'll be back with the TimeformUS Pacecast on Tuesday.